This video is going to cover the idea of program control. In essence, what we're going to talk about here is changing the scan cycle. PLCs do a variety of things. There's a full cycle or scan that happens where it checks inputs, updates ladder logic, writes to outputs. It's sort of a bigger picture what's happening in the whole PLC, but more to the important part of this video, what we have is ladder logic inside the PLC is always processed the same way. It's always processed the same way we'd read a book, from top to bottom, left to right. So it reads across here. At the end of this line, it would now read this. At the end of this line, it would now read this, and so on, working its way down the rungs. If left default, this is the scan cycle, left to right, top to bottom. But there's a lot of things we can do that mess with this or change this scan cycle. And I'd like to show you here some of the things I'm talking about. Up here at the top, there's some tabs, and one of them is called Program Control. And it has a whole series of things that allow us to control how the program is scanned. The most popular by far is, in an earlier video I talked about program files. We default in ladder 2, so the scan starts and ends in ladder 2. But I can add more programs by simply saying new and pick whatever program number I want. I can give it a name. So I mean, quite often if you had a fault sequence or something that was done frequently, or to just break up the program so it's easier to sort out what things are. I mean, quite often it's just makes troubleshooting a program a lot easier if, like, logic that's responsible for doing similar things is all in the same place. And we can create subroutines. So the logic will always start in 2 and then go out and run this subroutine. To give you an idea of how that would look sort of pictorially, if I started out with ladder 2, it would scan ladder 2. When it gets to the point, so this is doing that whole left to right, top to bottom thing. When it gets to a command that says run a subroutine, it jumps out, and what I just created was ladder 3. That's badly written, but ladder 3. It will now scan all of ladder 3 and then return back to ladder 2, where it continues the rest of the way, and at the end of ladder 2 there must be an end command. The scan must always start at the top of ladder 2 and must always end at the end command of ladder 2. But we can have it jump out, do something, and come back. And again, in this subroutine, it's going to scan left to right, top to bottom. So it just continually runs this pattern now, this loop. Going back to the logic, we can put in a command. For example, in this case, I want to say when the button is pressed, JSR. So I'll put a JSR command, and I'll say go to 3. I'm not going to worry about its name. Now what's going to happen is it would come in, scan ladder 2. When it gets to this rung, if the button were pressed, so if this were closed, then this would be a true statement, and it's going to jump out, as I just illustrated, run ladder 3, at the end of ladder 3, jump back, and continue from here. And of course, when it sees this end, it'll be satisfied that it started at the top of ladder 2, ended at the bottom of ladder 2, but jumped out and ran this piece of logic in ladder 3. I think it's a pretty simple concept. I could push it out farther and say a ladder 4. I didn't give it a name, but you could have. In essence, there's tricks you can do, things you can do. Some of the variations of this are, I can say now, and this is probably the more common version, come down, hit a jump, go out, run something else, go back to where you were, continue running, and then do it again, right? And then eventually hit an end. Typically, you could have 25, 30 different subroutines all running, right? And then this would be 3, and this would be 4, and so on down the line. But the other option is, you could even say the same process, but come out, jump out to 3. But at this point, I could say, run another subroutine from within this one, right? And I realize this isn't the world's greatest flowchart, but you get the idea. Ladder 2. And so now I can say it starts here, hits a jump, goes out, hits another jump, so this would be 3, goes out, hits 4, runs 4, and then works its way back. On our processors, we're allowed to run up to 8 subroutines called nested. This is called nested subroutines right here. Our processors will support up to 8 nested subroutines. I'll caution you though, it gets confusing, and if you don't, within a certain amount of time, start and end this scan, you'll get what's called a watchdog timer. I think it's defaulted to about 10 milliseconds. So you really don't want to push too deep or too complex if you can help it. But yeah, you could have jumped out here, done something, come back. That's the subroutine idea. Some of the other things that are in this program control option, if I removed the JSR, which is by far the most popular, hopefully it'll let me here, I don't know what's going on. There we go. Something else that's common would be, for example, a jump to label, where I can put in a jump, and farther down in the logic, I can put in a label, and all that will happen is I assign this a number, I assign this a number, and when this is true, it would jump from this jump to this label. It's a pretty straightforward process. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the rest of these because it's really, I've never seen it used in a program, and we won't be doing it in our labs. But you can say jump from one to another. Another option that's sometimes used is there's this one called temporary end, where you're basically now saying if this button's pressed, this is no longer the end. The end is now here. So it would never run this. If it thinks this is the end of the logic, I've ended the logic early. And this could be used here, or I could go into a subroutine and put it here, so that if you go into a subroutine and something goes horribly wrong, machine crashes, whatever, you can say just end now. Is another one of the commands that we could use. Something that people tend to get confused on, and I'll go back to my ladder 2. There's one here called return from subroutine and a subroutine label. If I were in a subroutine and I had a whole series of logic in here, a bunch of stuff, and things were happening up here, I could, if I wanted, at some point along the way, say here, say, you know what, I would actually like it to return here if some condition were true, right? So in this case, without putting addresses in, I could say if the button was pressed, if the limit switch was hit, if something was out of position, I want you to return to the main program without doing the rest of this. So it's an early return. You don't need a return at the end of a subroutine. When an end is reached in a subroutine, it will instantly return back to the place it jumped from. And the other one that's here is this SBR. It stands for subroutine, and it's really just, it doesn't have a function. It's an appendix. It really just defines this subroutine. So it's telling you this is not a main program, this is a subroutine, and it allows you to put a label on the subroutine. Again, never seen it used. I've seen the return command where I want to end early. I've seen the temporary end used. JSR is used all the time. So that kind of sums up the whole program control tab.